So it's the 19th April. So we are having a technical call today for MicroProfile. So it's basically first announcement is very pleased to finally release MicroProfile GraphQL 2.0. So we'll do the final tidy up, and hopefully all the artifacts will be in Maven Central soon. And also do the after this review is basically some TCK process clarification. I will do a minor kind of PR to clarify the TCK process. So I will try to do it. I mean tomorrow or later today. So let's continue our discussion on the kind of June-July release. So now is we are nearly May. We really need to nearly May. So very soon. So in a couple of weeks. So we need to continue finalize our content for the June-July release. I think last time David has a good kind of the thoughts regarding the May release. So basically, it's if we do the May release, like a MicroProfile 5.1, and then can include both telemetry, like MicroProfile telemetry and MicroProfile open tracing. So it's basically it's we last time we didn't we didn't discuss in greater deal about greater details regarding how we handle it. So which one should be enabled, which one should be disabled. Basically, we need to, initial conversation. So the open tracing is enabled and MicroProfile telemetry is disabled. And then, however, you can add a switch to disable open tracing and enable telemetry. So we can explore. I think this sounds like a good compromise to get 5.1 out with still have something we can talk about. And then in the 6.0, we can focus on the Jakarta profile and also get the other specs such as the metrics 5.0 and etc. because it has backward incompatible changes. So we can continue the conversation here. So what do people think?
Yeah, one of the problems why we decided not to support open tracing anymore is because there is no support for open tracing left. The team is not reachable, and supporting open tracing is really hard.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that means we don't have to make new things on open tracing, but obviously there's a gap between no longer producing new features and people still having stuff in production.
Yeah, but it's even impossible to fix things.
Why?
The team is not reachable anymore.
Right, but API things are different things than implementation things, right? So you can still fix implementation things, correct?
Roberto was into details.
Well, I mean, it depends. Right? It depends on use by or case by case scenario. So there are some APIs that we use directly from the releases by Open Tracing project, and if those have issues, then there is no way for us to fix them other than forking them. Until now, I haven't gotten into any of those cases where we have an issue on their jars, or the ones that we use in MicroProfile, but we already had that experience with other jars that also released by them that are used directly by implementations, because they provide also implementations, and in that case we had to fork them and fix the issues over there. Now, it is unlikely that such cases will happen in the APIs that we're using, because I mean, the project has been pretty much abandoned for the last couple of years, and right now we haven't found anything. So the chance is kind of small, but it can actually happen. And well, if an issue shows up in that case, then there is no way. I mean, no one is maintaining these APIs anymore. So we'll have to fork them and release them on a new GAV.
Right, but I think the key thing that you were mentioning is that the implementations that you are using that they provide aren't getting maintained. But the APIs, I mean, you know, like when we deprecate
nothing of them is being maintained at the moment.
Sure, like so when we stopped working on CMP, you know, we didn't immediately yank it out of the platform and say no one can use it because it's not getting worked on anymore. Obviously, that doesn't, you know, there's a very big line between API and implementation, and we don't need to be updating the API, but that doesn't mean that people can't continue to use any code that they have in production. And yeah, if there are any issues that happen with the implementation, you know, you're on the hook to resolve them. But that's the same thing that we all sign up for.
Well,
Yeah.
I stated this multiple times. I still think there is a wrong message to ship open tracing as a platform release. It should go outside the platform, and people should still be able to use it as a standalone spec, but it shouldn't be part of the platform anymore. I mean, because basically we're just putting the message that, okay, we're shipping tracing, open tracing in the platform, so we're still going to support it for at least a year. I just think that sends the wrong message, because I mean, we know that open tracing is not going to be updated anymore. It's not going to have any new features. So I think it should go out of the platform. People can still use it, as you're mentioning, outside the platform as a standalone spec, but at least we're sending a message saying, please don't use open tracing because the new thing is open telemetry.
And can I ask you a question? If the JVM wants to remove something, do you think that they should mark it deprecated first, and then remove it, or should they just remove it?
I mean, the problem is we had this discussion before, and because we were not able to make a decision, I did propose to deprecate it for MicroProfile 5, but we were never able to make a decision, right? Because there was no deprecation process into place. So basically, the problem is, the question that you're asking is unfair, because the JVM has a well-defined deprecation process, while we don't have any. And it shouldn't be an excuse for us to keep putting stuff or keep stuff in the platform because we don't have that process in place. So the solution is just keep it in the platform for how many long versions we don't even sure about.
I mean, I don't know. I'm not proposing that solution, but isn't the solution, isn't some part of this that we should mark it deprecated, regardless of if we do or do not have rules? I mean, we could, you know, saying we didn't come to agreement in the past is definitely accurate, but doesn't mean we cannot come to agreement now, right?
Yeah, I think we can like come up with a process to deprecate. Maybe it's the kind of as simple as like make the spec, which is saying this is deprecated. Or even when we do a release, like you know, we have this on the MicroProfile.io, the building blocks. We just make it that building block as a kind of special marker deprecated. So
And by the way, let me just add that also the question that you made is unfair for a second reason, because the comparison that you're doing is not correct. When the JVM, when you're saying that JVM deprecates and removes something, then when JVM removes it, no one is able to use it. And that's not what I'm suggesting over here. I'm just saying remove it from the platform. It's still kept as a standalone spec, so people can still use it for as many versions as they want. That's a completely different scenario.
Yeah, so I had my hand raised here and I just thought I think this sounds like a pretty good compromise, right? Where it's not being eliminated entirely, just being moved out of the platform, in which sense it really becomes optional, right? As to whether or not people want to implement it. And so I do have to restart that conversation with Paul Buck on deprecation process. I did ping him on it, but we have to begin discussing it. At some point, this spec is going to be deprecated.
How is Paul Buck involved in this conversation?
Oh no, because we don't have from a spec process perspective, we do not have a way of deprecating a spec. Because keep in mind, the way you do it through the Eclipse Foundation is you do it at the project level, right? You can basically archive a project, right? Well, we have all of our specs belong to the same project. So we don't really have an Eclipse Foundation process means of deprecating a specification.
I don't agree with that. Well, first of all, it's not accurate. Regardless of whether or not I agree or not, it isn't the case for all situations in Jakarta EE that there is one specification project per specification. We have situations, at least 3 or 4, or at least 2 that I'm aware of, where there are multiple specifications, 3 of them where there are multiple specifications per sitting in a specification project. So this situation exists over there as well. And it's not, and we remove and deprecate things from the platform all the time. So just to quickly say, like, the platform project has the core profile spec, the full profile spec, and the web profile spec, and the managed bean spec. That's several right there. There's the web services project, which has Jazz and Jack's WS, and JWS, which is a totally different kind of spec. So it's like 3 right there. And then there's this stable platform, the stable API project, which has like 5 or 4 or 5 in itself. Several of those are deemed, stable, deprecated, don't use them. So we don't need to involve the foundation to deprecate things. We do it all the time on Jakarta East side. We don't have anything in the specification project on the Jakarta East side that explicitly enables or disables deprecation. It's just, we make a decision, we mark it clearly in the spec, we release a new spec through the spec process, it's done.
So based on that, David, is in the Jakarta, the web profile, the platform release also is include the optional specs, right? The optional specs.
There's a whole different conversation on that side of the fence where it's not possible to have any options anymore going forward. But that's a different decision that was made on that side of the fence.
Right. So in this case, if we kind of, this is I'm thinking, like if we mark the open tracing as deprecated, also make it optional. Included in the platform release. This could be kind of at least for the 5.1, and then in 6.0 we can completely drop it off. The only reason, John and Roberto, if we remove it from the platform now, we can't really release 5.0. We need to release 6.0 because we removed something, right? So this is kind of which I think is this we are trying to achieve by having a minor release instead of major release.
Yeah, I agree. For minor release, we don't could have breaking changes. And of course, we can say that or mark something as deprecated and remove it later with a major release. The question is it worth going that way, or saying in that case, there's an unsupported technology and there's a follow-up technology, why we need an intermediate minor release for that, to help that transition that need to be done.
So that's a kind of the two things, right? If like we go with the 5.1, I don't think we can remove the open tracing. If
I
we
agree.
go with 6.0, yeah, that's a complete different thing, and we can remove it. So I think it's in the past we discussed we want to do a manual release. So now it's a kind of, if we do 6.0 release, are we like are we kind of up to the 6.0 release? Basically, it's strip, remove the open tracing and directly put in the telemetry.
Well, isn't adding a new major specification like open telemetry requires a major release?
No, I don't think adding a spec requires like a major release, is because there's no backward incompatible changes.
It may not have major incompatible changes, but it still is a major change on the at the platform level.
We've done that for ages though, Roberto. We've added new specs. Probably more specs have been added in dot releases than major releases. This is just off the top of my head, right?
Yeah.
So we have a long-standing history of adding specs in dot releases.
Yeah, that's right.
So just high level, like to me, what would make the most sense is that we don't deprecate anything until the replacement is present and usable by people. So, it would be, I'm not going to list version numbers, right? So just in terms of ideal overlap, when we add open telemetry, that would be the best time to deprecate open tracing. And then at some future point, could be the very next release, we remove open tracing. That would seem to me the most logical situation, because if we deprecate something and we roll it out and there is no replacement, what is the user going to do? Don't use this. What do I use instead? Nothing. There's nothing else instead. Don't have any tracing. So, obviously they're going to have to use it anyway because it's sitting right there and there's no replacement. So, the ideal time to deprecate something is when the replacement is present. It's strange, even coding, yeah.
Not perfectly agreeing with that, because we had the same discussion for 5.0 and to remove open tracing from 5.0. And there we said, oh no, we do not remove a spec when there is no replacement available. But we can, of course, before a spec when there is a replacement in a major release with a breaking change.
I think that we need to clarify something here, because I think that we're mixing different, or at least we have different understandings on different wordings. So what does it mean to deprecate something MicroProfile? What does it mean remove something from MicroProfile? Do we have a clear understanding on each of those statements? Because I think that all of us have different understandings of what all of these things mean.
Yeah, you're right, Roberto. I mean, deprecating is marking something that it will be removed from MicroProfile at all or the platform. And remove something means it could be removed from the platform or from MicroProfile at all. And what we are talking now, from my perspective, is we are talking about the platform release of MicroProfile and not MicroProfile in total. I think the word platform is not the best because it could represent MicroProfile in total and the platform release, which is more a profile like, yeah, it should be, from my perspective, more something like a core profile of MicroProfile, an umbrella spec. But yeah, of course, there could be outside of that umbrella spec releases of specification under MicroProfile.
Yeah. So my definition of deprecated is that we're signaling it for removal, for future removal, and advising people to not use it and to use something else instead.
Signal from removal from where? From the platform or for the entire MicroProfile? When I say platform, I'm talking about the 8 specs that we currently ship on each major release. So are you saying remove it from there or remove it entirely?
I'm saying that I'm saying within the context, so obviously there has to be context. So if we're talking about the platform and we mark it as deprecated in the perspective of the platform, the removal would be from the platform.
If it's a standalone, if we say deprecated, so that means this spec will no longer to be released, right?
That can happen as well. Then it's being marked deprecated in it, it could say this specification is obsoleted. Please use this specification instead. Individual specifications get obsoleted all the time. Like HTTP 1.0, it's obsoleted by 1.1, which is obsoleted by 2. Now, they're all in a series, but when you package things together in a bucket, like a platform or a JVM profile, whatever, and you want to remove one technology and use a different technology instead, you would typically mark the one technology deprecated, steer everybody towards the new technology, and then eventually remove the deprecated technology. Typically, there is a period of time that you give people to make the transition.
Right, so it's also, even if it's a signal for removal, so if it's a package in platform release, remove it from platform release. And also it's a no future releases, except no future major or minor releases, right? Because the maintenance, you still need to service the older version.
Yeah, when you say remove it from the platform releases, that's a future step, right?
Yes, remove.
Yeah, you're signaling it would be removed. You're not actually removing it.
Yeah, you're right. So here.
Maybe you want to put that part under, the what it means to remove something.
Yeah.
Which could be a different. Yeah, there you go.
I think this, makes sense. If we kind of do a 5.1 release, we just mark open tracing as deprecated for removal, and then also we package the MicroProfile telemetry, and then it's in the 6.0, hopefully in October or November release. we directly remove it, remove the open tracing from platform. Yeah, platform release.
That would work.
I think at least this is not sudden, like at least we have a transition period. I think it's in the 5.1 release, like open tracing, like the spec, the title will just add a bracket, deprecated, and basically add a statement there.
Or we could, wherever we in the MicroProfile platform spec where we say that open tracing is included, we would put the deprecated, yeah, there in the title. We don't necessarily need to put deprecated in the title of the actual open tracing spec, but we could certainly say that in the, like in the subtitle or something like that. You know,
Or either,
or in a chapter, or the first, you know, the very first paragraph somehow, you know, that it's obsoleted and people should use the open telemetry spec instead.
Yeah, well, deprecated from the platform, so that makes sense.
oh yeah. So in that, okay, hello, Adam. So it's in the spec. So have another section.
Yeah, where does it say right there? Click on MicroProfile Open Tracing 3.0. Right there, it would, very first sentence would say it's deprecated, or there would be a big deprecated thing, or something in that paragraph would say it's deprecated.
Right. And also in the GitHub repo for the MicroProfile open tracing, also we should mark it the maintenance mode.
I think each of those MicroProfile XX links over there in the on the index panel, each of them has a version number, so we might list it there. So if you click on the MicroProfile 4.0 link on the left side there.
Here.
Yeah. Right. So
Oh.
in the where it's deprecated, so it wouldn't be here. You would add it, right, and then you would, I guess, you would mark it deprecated up there in that table.
Yeah.
Right.
Fine. I mean, you could put, like, you know, you could put the
Column
link- you could put-
specifications have been deprecated and just list one.
Yeah, in the future.
Oh,
there you
yeah. We could add another heading.
Oh, that's a good call. Yeah, that works too.
Yeah. And then also in the repo, which is like market maintenance mode.
Yeah, I mean, we should specifically steer people towards open telemetry in that, you know what I mean? So when people go to the open tracing repository, they should, you know, we should say, go look at open telemetry.
Yeah.
You know, it could be like a little note at the beginning. You know, right under the opening thing,
Yeah.
you know, right there at
The
the
re-
bottom. You know, after that paragraph, there could be a ASCII doc note or important or something like that. You know, they call those admonition blocks.
Yeah, I think yeah. So it's kind of makes sense. So just note down.
just FYI, Roberto, your comment that when things are removed from the JVM, no one else can use them is not entirely correct. So all of the, JAXB, basically everything that was donated to the Eclipse Foundation, all that stuff was removed from the JVM and people can still continue to use it.
Not without adding extra steps.
Sure, but you were also describing people adding extra steps.
Sure, I mean, and that was what I was proposing over here, because if you remove open tracing for the platform, most people will probably not even notice, because open tracing works automatically. Unless you use its own API for you to generate your own traces. In most cases, you're not even going to use the API, because it's just going to trace stuff directly on JAX-RS. And if you're even using the API directly, the only thing that you have to do for you to not break your app is just to add dependency on it, and that's it.
Well, it depends on the implementation. That last sentence is an implementation assumption.
Sure, but I mean, if you put open tracing as an optional or actually outside the platform, then it will be on each implementation if they choose if they want to carry on implementing or not. So you could have the option of saying, okay, I still want to keep open tracing for as long as I want, and users could just put the open tracing API in their apps, so they can use the API directly, and that's it.
Yeah. So I hear what you're saying on that stuff. I don't necessarily agree that that's the way to go with the first part. I did want to call out that you said it was an unfair comparison with the JVM, but I do believe it still is an accurate comparison.
Well, it is, because the way that you're putting stuff, it just seems that you're doing stuff without having to do any changes, while in here you also have to do the exact same thing.
I'm not sure I understood what that meant.
Never mind.
Okay, so so I think is are there any other strong strong, what is that, objections regarding shipping both open tracing and mark as deprecated, and also add the MicroProfile telemetry in the platform?
Just
Yeah,
to, go ahead.
if we talk about we should maybe be a little bit more exact when writing this. MP open tracing will be replaced by MP telemetry tracing.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, good point.
That's one point. And one important thing from my perspective is if we do that intermediate step with that minor release, which, yeah, could be nice to do. Does that mean that we release MicroProfile 6.0 at the same date, or does that mean that we will ship MicroProfile 6.0 later?
Later, 6.0 will be released later.
If we do that intermediate step, that means a delay of MicroProfile 6.0.
I think that's made on purpose, because 6.0 we want to reserve that for the E10 alignment. So it's towards the end of this year. And then I think this is a good compromise. I think as David mentioned, basically this could be viewed as a transition period, only for a brief few months. And they give people heads up, said, okay, open tracing is going to be replaced by telemetry, and then boom, 6.0 that being replaced. So open tracing will be removed. and then is together with E10 alignment in the 6.0. So
Yeah, but when Jakarta EE10 releases will be released
when
in this summer, right?
yeah, it will be 2Q.
And
no, yeah,
Q,
it's
Q2 is planned, is
Yeah,
still
yeah.
planned. And what happened if release that and there is no compatible MicroProfile release that is based on the same Jakarta EE specs like Jakarta EE10?
Then we have to wait to release. 'Cause
Yeah,
the compatible implementation is a requirement for release.
yes.
Yeah, but I'm talking about there are some implementations that want to support Jakarta EE specifications and MicroProfile at the same time with one implementation. And how do they offer MicroProfile functionality if there is no compatible MicroProfile release?
Are you talking about how can you use MP5.1 together with E10 in the same runtime?
Yes.
So I guess that they like when the E10 is out, that basically they won't. Actually, it's
Well,
actually the implementation could do that themselves if they want.
so just to be clear, when we say release, it just needs to be something that has been released. There is no requirement of what kind of release it is. For example, they could do a milestone or alpha, beta, preview, whatever they want to call it, on one side of the fence, and keep doing alpha, milestone, beta previews on the other side of the fence. Like they could do milestones and alphas through the Jakarta release and the MicroProfile release, and then do their final version once they're both finished. It's their call how they want to manage that. Does that make sense?
Yes, but yeah, then the customers have to wait for an implementation. If they use both technologies, they need to wait for a release for Jakarta EE10 and MicroProfile 6.0 in one implementation to do that step.
That's right.
Well, I mean,
And then, yeah.
You're assuming that E10 is incompatible with 5, which shouldn't be. Are we seeing a reason why MP5 couldn't work with 10?
Yeah, there are breaking changes in some of the specs. I didn't check it, but if there are breaking changes on the subset that is shared, then that could be an issue.
Sure, but as far as I've seen, I don't remember seeing anything because I mean we're not use any specific stuff from Jakarta. I mean we use 4 specs, but we don't use like these specific APIs or deprecated APIs. So the thing that we heavily rely on is CDI, which we basically just use standard stuff. But yeah, you may right, but I would not expect for it to break, and if it does, well, I guess that we'll have to put the release out there as quick as possible.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing technically stopping someone from putting Jakarta E10 and MicroProfile 5.1 in the same box and shipping it.
Yeah, it's as far as I can remember, like the CDI bit or the APIs. I don't think that the API we use. I don't think that was removed or updated or modified in the CDI4. However, like, yeah, we have to look at the case by case basis. So hopefully they can continue work together. So I think we had, I think sounds like good compromise. At least we have some roadmap, like 5.0, 5.1, we kind of mark the open tracing deprecated, and then we put in the telemetry, and then we discuss, look ahead for the 6.0. The release, like we encourage the implementation to, to do the decoder E10 implementation and at the same time support 6.0. Is that fair? Is that fair? Or I think is the kind of we have discussed for a long time.
That matches my understanding. Just to quickly note though, when we're adding when we're adding MP telemetry, it will be disabled by default, correct? At least the tracing aspect of it.
Yeah, this is the next the talking point. So do we want to deprecate telemetry, or we want the same mark the open tracing as deprecated, we just disable it by default, and then open telemetry enabled by default. So the thing is, if you use MicroProfile open tracing, most of the time you don't use the APIs. So for that kind of use case, it continue to work without any kind of issues. The only issue is kind of you directly use the open tracing API. So you have to go through the migration. Maybe it's because the mark is deprecated. Even if the mark is deprecated, and then maybe it's adding a special switch, and you have to put a switch back on. If you want to use it, maybe that's a good way to say, okay, you have to turn it on manually so that you had better change it, migrate to telemetry.
Because in a minor release, even if I use all the functionality of the spec, I do not expect that something breaks. So then we only could add, or we should keep open tracing active and telemetry tracing passive. And you actually need to switch off open tracing functionality and switch on MP telemetry tracing.
That's my preference.
By configuration.
Yeah, so I'll echo that, but I will say that my feelings on this are bigger than just because we're dealing with this situation. I really prefer that things like open tracing, which do have some overhead to them, and people may have their own solutions that they're already employing, things like that should be switched on rather than enabled by default. And it doesn't have, my preference on that, it doesn't have anything to do with the fact that we're dealing with a situation where one was already switched on. It really stems from just years of EJB world where we had everything on by default that we could ever imagine, and we just kept stacking up functionality after functionality. And eventually people didn't want to touch anything because they just couldn't understand what was even there being enabled by default. So they preferred, ultimately we wipe the slate clean with CDI, and in CDI, you don't get a lot of behavior unless you explicitly add an annotation to say, I want that behavior. And that's just, it just works better over time, in my experience, to allow people to choose the technologies that they want, put them in the box, make it easier for them to enable it, but don't have all these things enabled by default.
From the semantic versioning point of view, yeah, I agree to have basically keep the existing behavior. But somehow, I don't know, I'm in both boats. somehow I think how kind of hard the message we want to pass on is that this is deprecated. So it's I'm more thinking about the GDK classes and etc. You know, the security manager, if you deprecated and also marked for removal, if you still want to use it, you set a property. So are we, I mean, how far do we want to go with this? Do we just saying, okay, so we mark as on by default and next time we just remove it? Or we mark it off by default and the next time we remove it?
I think from a customer perspective, I would be very frustrated if something that I relied on for visibility of my architecture, which is what tracing does, was shut off without my awareness. And I'm not going to read 100% of all specifications every time I do an upgrade. Most customers don't do that.
Right. Yeah, that's fair. Probably it's kind of the signify why the manner release.
So
Anyway, I
if
don't
that's the
have
case,
strong-
if that's the case, and you're even assuming that, how are people going to find out the tracing is deprecated?
I mean, you got to give people a shot to do the right thing. And if they don't do it within the time that you gave them, then they own a certain amount of their outcome, right? It's all about,
Everybody reads release notes, right?
sure.
Well, I mean, we're just having people assuming that they don't read documents or release notes, so that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Let's continue to assume that they never do, right? So if they let's imagine there's a user who never reads anything. The very first time, if this user never reads anything and we went and removed something right off the bat and it stopped working and they put a shit out into production, they could still go, well, you know, they're gonna notice that it didn't work. They're gonna look to see that there was never, you know, that there was no warning, and the fact that they didn't read it before they noticed it stopped working is now irrelevant. You know, like the customer is going to go, you removed this from me without telling me first. You gave me no time to prepare. The fact that I didn't read this and notice afterwards is completely not even what we're talking about. You know, they won't have that conversation with you. Now, on the flip side, if you give them warning and they ignore the warning, they can't get mad at you. They can't waste your time reading you the riot act, asking you for this, that, telling you you've done something wrong, slapping your hand because they missed your warnings.
Yeah,
Sure,
so,
I agree, but if you want to do this right, like we were discussing, then having a warning of 3 months is not going to be enough.
It's at least something.
But where will the warning be? Is release note not enough warning then? Or is the time?
I
3
mean,
months.
basically, we're talking about here of adding a release right now in June with 5.1. When we deprecate the spec, we add another one in it, and then in October we're saying we're going to remove it. I mean, we have like a 3 month delay between both releases if everything goes according to plan. But even if it does, we're saying about what, like 4 or 5 months. That's pretty much nothing in our world, and we know for sure that for deprecation and moving stuff, that's really not enough time.
Right, but it's at least something. It's better than zero, and it would come with a major version change that improves the chance that the right thing can happen. And you know, just because you can't achieve perfection on all things doesn't mean you don't try, right?
Correct.
No, I mean, you can achieve what you want. It's just, I mean, why then we don't keep it as deprecated for until 7? Then why are we going to remove it on 6? Because once we have both there, and we have the rules to have both there, then we can move it whenever we want, and we can give people more time to do it exactly what you described.
If you're on board with that, I'm fine with that.
too. Just notice in time that you are going to deprecate it or going to remove it by deprecating it. And then we have time
No,
to.
I mean, what I'm saying is we either remove it now or we give a fair amount of time to remove it, not just give like a couple of months to remove it. That's all. So once we have both in there, then we can have plenty of time for people to adjust and remove. I just think that having just a few months for people to adjust is just, I mean, it's just not enough. I rather prefer, if we're going to go this route, to just keep it for at least one major version longer and do a proper deprecation cycle.
I'm okay with that.
I think is
Too.
if we I mean, we also want to promote telemetry. I think I'm okay with keep it in the platform release. I think is if we don't remove in 6.0, maybe in 6.0 we flip the switch. We say, okay, now the default is the telemetry. Yeah, you can still use the open tracing. However, you need to set that property.
Or rather, as I mentioned, ideally we don't have things like, ideally there is some weight to these things, right? And so ideally they're off by default and people can enable the ones they want. And we and that's a lesson that we keep with us going forward. But yes, 6.0 would be our opportunity to say, now open tracing is now no longer enabled by default, and here's the way you enable it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think
But one point, did we had the mission statement in MicroProfile, which is intended to be used in microservices, not in big monoliths that you cannot change in time? They say move fast and break things. I think we should keep two possibilities how to do things in for a longer time. The project decides which MicroProfile release, major release it will use, and that means if you switch a major release, you have breaking changes, and then you need to change the technology if the old technology is not supported anymore. But you can do it when you do that step. You don't need a few major releases to move forward. Not with,
I don't think it's the number of releases, but the amount of time, right? So
yeah, but you decide as a user when you do the major release step in your application and your installation. You don't have to do to switch from 5.1 to 6.0 within 3 months. You can do it in 2 years if you like.
Sure, you're correct, absolutely correct. That is what most people do, to be honest.
Yeah, but then there's an implementation. There's implementation. You need to keep the backup solution intact for a longer time. So the deprecated state will be transferred over multiple breaking releases. Then, as an implementer, you have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I don't know when 7.0 is going to be released, likely next year around this time. It's going to probably, and that's typically when we would have released major versions. It would usually be the second or third release that we do for the year. So, you know, yeah, who knows how that will get managed. All I know is that for 6, we'll probably try to be lining that up with our Jakarta E10 release.
Yeah.
Yes. So this plan is sound, at least according to me.
And there's another.
And also the Java, so we can move up to Java SE. Yeah, that's exactly what I am
11.
doing. Yeah. That you so that's it. Yeah.
We have ourselves a scope.
Emily, you keep writing down that MP telemetry will be enabled by default. So just know that that's not something I've ever agreed with. I've always explicitly said ideally we don't enable that by default. So it doesn't matter. Yeah, like at least write it down as that there's not agreement on that decision.
So I mean in the 6.0, yeah.
Ever. I'm saying it shouldn't ever be enabled by default.
Right. We can continue the conversation on that.
Yeah.
6.0.
I do agree with open tracing being disabled in 6.0 by default.
Right, but if it's not, is this one disabled, there should be a kind of, should be a replacement, so.
Right, but it should be enabled by default because as I mentioned, you know, people do put their own functionality in the box, right? So if they already have a tracing situation, the current thing is that they have to use vendor specific flags to disable these things. And ideally, this could be a choice of the user.
I think we need to discuss further. I don't think it's right to package that telemetry in the release, and then previously it was disabled is mainly because open tracing was enabled. Now, if open tracing was disabled, surely the telemetry should be enabled.
Right.
So,
I hear that perspective. I don't share it, but I hear the perspective.
Yeah. So it's reached top of the hour, so we can at least we have some some rough guideline for the 5.1, and then we can continue. Discuss more on the further down. Probably it's 6.0. At the same time, we discuss detailed content on the 5.1 next week. Yeah, great.
We have no time, but 2 weeks ago, I mentioned that JEP, and there may be following up JEPs, but when we have that discussion, there's a link regarding the Java SE 11 requirement.
Right, okay, we can discuss next.
In 2 weeks, yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah.
Great meeting, everybody.
Yeah, great.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.